Hi, Paul Gorney. We're going to look at, out of Chicago's hundreds of neighborhoods, there are not just 77 as so many people talk about. There's actually hundreds. So don't be misled in thinking that there's 77. There are, 200 plus neighborhoods in Chicago. We're going to look at 5 of the top neighborhoods in Chicago. I have been born, raised, selling real estate here for 30 years, dealing with a lot of our business leaders, professional athletes, and one of the top brokers in the city over the last 30 years. So I'll look at, with a lot of insight, Lincoln Park will be number 1. This is an area where most out-of-towners, people coming to Chicago, relocating, will look at Lincoln Park because everyone knows about it. Michael Jordan lived there at the beginning of his career. Many celebrities have lived there and continue to live there, and it's a very well-known area. So very historic with lots of parks. The lake is a short walk away. Really just a beautiful area. It's very easy to get to many other neighborhoods, including downtown Chicago, the Mag Mile, the Loop, where you may work. Very easy to catch 1 or 2 trains, bike, take a bus, Uber, very short commute. So the values in Lincoln Park are actually much higher than in many of the other areas in the city. Single family homes will typically be somewhere, around $1 million and up, where many of the newer homes or renovated homes will be $2 million to $5 million. Where you'll get more affordable housing is studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedroom condos. There's many older buildings in Lincoln Park, vintage buildings that are more traditional, and the bedroom sizes are smaller, and you can sometimes get some fairly affordable units there, whereas many of the new construction buildings that have been built are much greater amount per square foot. So those units can be 1 to 1.5, whereas the older, smaller units, you can start to get things in the 400 to 600 range. So just call, text, email if you have any questions about Lincoln Park at all. I'm one of the most experienced agents in the area for the last 30 years and can be happy to answer any questions that you need at all. I do not have a team, it's just me, so you will get the highest quality when you call. Aware that Lincoln Park has some of the best schools in the city and in the state. The public high school, Lincoln Park High School, and the elementary schools are very highly ranked by niche.com. There's also incredible private school options that are close by. You have the French school, you have the British school, you have other schools that are private that are fairly costly schools because of the neighborhood and the quality of the education, but they are available and very popular and sometimes have waiting lists. So the restaurants in Lincoln Park are well known. Some of the neighboring neighborhoods have definitely stepped up their game quite a bit over the last 15 years. But Lincoln Park continues to have some of the finest, best restaurants that the city has. So there's no shortage of them at all, as well as the shopping in Lincoln Park has always been very good. Lincoln Park was developed really seriously in the 80s, and it started to really be developed, and prices went up quite a bit. So from like the mid 80s to the mid 90s, Lincoln Park was pretty much the best shopping area you could have in any neighborhood in Chicago, next to downtown. So now it's still very strong, but there are, just like the restaurants, other competing neighborhoods. But Lincoln Park continues to be very strong for shopping, clothes, specialty items, just some great streets to walk and have a good time and get some good shopping in. Lincoln Park also has a very strong theater scene. Many theaters along Halsted Street that are very well known. The Steppenwolf, for example, and others, many great productions, as well as Comedy Club, Zanies, which is on the Lincoln Park Old Town border, And Second City is where a lot of the people from Saturday Night Live started. John Candy, Dan Aykroyd, Jim Belushi, Steve Carell. Many people started out in Second City. Great shows to see at night. And that, again, is right on the Lincoln Park Old Town border. But keep in mind, Lincoln Park, if you like to work out and you like to bike ride, run, swim, is one of the best areas in the city because of the proximity to so much incredible lush park space, green space, lake, beaches, bike paths. It's really, pretty much the best in the city. And the way the city was originally laid out and planned, it laid it out for this. So there's no buildings that are very tall on the lake side of Lakeshore Drive, and it keeps the views and the beautiful green space there always. Nothing will ever be built there, so keep that in mind. Lincoln Park really is top notch for the zoo, the park, history museum. I mean, so many great things. The second neighborhood of one of the top neighborhoods out of all the neighborhoods in Chicago, really focused on the north side here, where my expertise is looking at the West Loop, which is close to the Loop, which is where most businesses are housed traditionally in Chicago, where most people travel to work downtown. And it's also very close to the lake, but very convenient for trains. So the West Loop has just completely catapulted onto the national scene, really, with a lot of money coming into the neighborhood from national, very large, deep-pocketed investors. You have Google's original headquarters in the West Loop. You have Oprah's old studio in the West Loop, which is now McDonald's headquarters. So very, very big names. Used to be, growing up, when I would go through the West Loop, which it was not called that at the time, but you'd go through the neighborhood and you'd see all the trucks delivering produce. It was just a mess. Like, the streets were a mess, busy, crowded trucks, produce, meat. It was really kind of a very commercial, industrial business neighborhood. But now these buildings have been scooped up by investors over the years, and they have put up office towers. Sterling Bay is one of the biggest developers in Chicago, and they've put up quite a few office towers and developments. So the restaurants in the West Loop are off the charts. I mean, there's been a lot of restaurant development groups that have come in, opened up multiple restaurants. They're doing very well by all accounts, and the money should keep coming in. There's a property recently where a national group came in, was looking at pickleball courts, bar, restaurant, pickleball. It's just that type of neighborhood that's just exploded and continues to explode, and the towers going up are enormous. So as far as housing goes, around this restaurant and retail and transportation, it's a very kind of hip vibe in the West Loop, and the housing are old buildings, which I sold some units in maybe 20 years ago. There was one of the first loft developments. So old factories and buildings that have been converted to lofts. So high ceilings, exposed brick, these types of things. And then more recently, the lofts that have been done are more polished, more upscale, more expensive. And then you have high rises in the West Loop, and those have great views of the city, a lot of sunlight, things like that. And then you have all kinds of row homes, townhomes that have been built that are very popular, and a lot of mid-rises where they're only about 6 to 8 stories high. A lot of condos and apartments too for people that are transient, that have been built. So traditionally, the condos, will be anywhere from like 400,000 to 600,000. The more expensive ones will be, 600 and up, and the high rises will have pretty high assessments, monthly fees for doorman, things like this. So, the original West Loop growing up in Chicago really all it was the area where you had the meat packing and the vegetables, produce, and then you had Greek Town, which is a strip of all Greek restaurants, which was a great date night, a lot of fun, great food, continues to be. But the families that own the restaurants also own the parking lots across the street, which they sold and made a lot of money selling them to developers that built enormous developments, from Whole Foods, high-rise condos, apartment buildings. So the neighborhood's changed a bit, but you still do have some great Greek restaurants, which is really was the original part of the neighborhood. Also, you have national developers that have built luxury apartment buildings that are typically 6 to 11,000 a month, depending on the size and if you're in a penthouse. So there's some great coffee shops, great retail, but really the West Loop's all about bars, restaurants, fun, and you can get to the United Center where the Chicago Bulls play, and where the Chicago Blackhawks play. So the West Loop is a very kind of cool neighborhood. Love to hang out there, and a lot of money funneling in there. Lastly, the Guinness Brewing Company just opened their first brew pub in the United States. It's housed in a train station that I looked at about 25 years ago and thought, why would anyone ever want to buy this building? And developer, small-time guy, bought it out of foreclosure for $1 million, and now he has the Guinness Brew Pub as a tenant, and the rest of the land around there's towers going up. I can't remember if they're office or apartment. Incredible development going on. So West Loop's worth checking out. Just call, text, email if you want to understand it a little bit more for yourself at all. Third area I'll look at as one of the better neighborhoods in Chicago is Lakeview. Lakeview is just hands down one of the most well-known areas, but you have subsections of Lakeview which are really neighborhoods. But Lakeview in general is around Wrigley Field, that's Wrigleyville, and then you have the Southport area, which is a great street that's been developed quite a bit since the mid-90s and really skyrocketed. So Lakeview is close to the lake, depending on where you live in it. Could be, you could be a quarter mile away, or you could be a mile and a half away. But it's really a great variety. You have some high rises along the lake, but the probably the most exciting part of Lakeview is around Wrigley Field, which is, a little subsection called Wrigleyville, and tons of restaurants, bars, movies outside at Wrigley, yoga outside at Wrigley. I mean, ice skating rink, Chris Kindle Market. It has everything. And then around Southport and Lakeview, down that street, is Jenny's Ice Cream, all kinds of restaurants, sushi, bars, very, very tight neighborhood vibe. So we actually owned buildings around there and lived there early on, and it's just a very quiet, nice, very neighborhoody feel. Have a lot of events during the holidays for kids, great trick-or-treating. Actually, my dad grew up right there when there used to be a streetcar going down the street. It's always just been like an old school Chicago neighborhood vibe. It still is, but a much more upscale spin on it. There's a Whole Foods, and there are really small apartments, really small condos, and a lot of these older buildings. So a lot of roommate situations for kids just graduating college, moving down there, people coming from out of town, and then a lot of starter condos that are still available, and some of the original loft buildings are pretty affordable. But you have a lot of multi-unit buildings with 2 units, 3 units, 6 units, so people can get pretty affordable condos to start out. But the condos that have been built are very costly. They're in 3-unit buildings, 6-unit buildings, or elevator buildings. So they're pretty darn expensive. I mean, you'll be like $700 to $1.2 for the nice condos. Single family homes are typically The nicer ones that have been done fairly recent are like 1.5 to 2 million, and then the new construction is above that. So homes are expensive in general. Many of the old timers homes, people have lived there 30, 40, 60 years. Most of them, not all, have been knocked down and built new by developers. But very quiet. Lakeview is kind of like Lincoln Park, but it's just a little bit further out away from downtown, a little bit further from the lake, but a little bit more quiet and affordable too. So the fourth neighborhood that we'll talk about is something totally different. You look at Rogers Park, which is the furthest neighborhood north in Chicago before you get to the suburbs. So Loyola University is housed in Rogers Park. Rogers Park has the closest proximity to the lake in the entire city. It's better than Lincoln Park, better than any other area. You can literally walk half a block and be on sand in Rogers Park. Not many people know this, but you can walk half a block, 2 blocks. You have direct access to many beautiful beaches. So Rogers Park used to be a very exclusive area. Many of the mansions were torn down and apartment buildings were put up by the lake. So those apartment buildings have great views. Rogers Park has a lot of courtyard buildings, meaning like large apartment buildings that have been converted to condos. Some have not been converted. There's a big student population, so you definitely have a nice college vibe. There's kind of a pretty cool art scene. But Rogers Park, really, the best thing about Rogers Park, in my opinion, is the lakefront. And the beaches go for a couple miles. You can walk beach to beach, different part of the neighborhoods. You can live in a large apartment. Rogers Park has larger apartments than just about, most areas in the city, where you can own the building, rent the other units out, and also people convert like 2-unit buildings to single-family homes. Rogers Park has a lot of little nooks and crannies and subsections of the neighborhood, has some very interesting schools, and has easy access to downtown from bus, an express bus, the train, and then it has great access to Evanston, where Northwestern University is. So Rogers Park is one of the less known, cooler neighborhoods, but you will be much further from downtown. But it only takes you about 25-30 minutes to get there, depending on how you're going.